There is a story most people have never been told. Not about kings, not about wars, about a company, a powerful force in the history of human civilization.
What you are about to witness is not ancient history. The systems this company built are still running the world today. Your investments, your markets, your entire financial reality. It started here, in rooms like this one, 400 years ago. And almost nobody talks about what it truly cost. This is that story.
Before Amazon, before Apple, before any corporation you have ever heard of, there was one company that made them all look like corner shops. It had its own army, its own navy, its own courts, its own currency, and the legal right, written into law, to declare war on sovereign nations. It wasn't a government, it was a company. And it was all built on something you probably have sitting in your kitchen right now, a spice. The year is 1602. Europe is obsessed. Not with gold, not with land, with flavor. Nutmeg, cloves, mace, cinnamon. These were the most valuable commodities on Earth. Nutmeg, at one point, was worth more than its weight in gold. Think about that for a second. A tiny, wrinkled nut, worth more than gold, by weight. And the crazy part? In the early 17th century, 10 pounds of nutmeg could be purchased for less than an English penny in the Banda Islands and resold in Europe for over 2 pounds. A markup of over 60,000%. 60,000%. That's not a business, that's a cheat code. And the Dutch, they figured that out before anyone else. So here's what they did. The Dutch government took every competing merchant company, all the rivals, all the chaos, and they forced them to merge into one. On March 20th, 1602, the States General of the Netherlands established the United East India Company, the VOC, and granted it a 21-year monopoly to carry out trade activities in Asia. One company, one monopoly, one flag. But here's where it gets insane. The charter didn't just give the VOC trading rights. It gave them the power to wage wars, sign treaties with foreign rulers, govern colonies, maintain a private army and a private navy, mint their own currency, and operate their own courts. Read that again, a private company given the power to start wars. This wasn't a corporation. This was a country with shareholders. Now, to make this work, to actually control the spice trade, the VOC needed to go somewhere most people had never been and never come back from alive. The Spice Islands, a cluster of volcanic islands in what is now eastern Indonesia. The sole producers of cloves, nutmeg, and mace, covering a relatively small area with a limited population, no more than about 100,000 people in the key spice-producing regions. Small islands, tiny population, the most valuable real estate on the planet. The Dutch wanted it all, and the man they sent to get it was one of the most ruthless figures in commercial history, Jan Pieterszoon Cohen. Born in the city of Hoorn in 1587, Cohen joined the VOC in 1606 and sailed to the East Indies as part of an early expedition. He rose fast, he was brilliant, he was calculating, and he believed deeply that monopoly required total control, and total control required total force. He had a quote that became the unofficial motto of the VOC, and it is chilling. Your honors know by experience that trade in Asia must be driven and maintained under the protection and favor of your honors' own weapons, and that the weapons must be paid for by the profits from the trade, so that we cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade. No trade without war. No war without trade. This wasn't business. This was conquest dressed in a suit. The Banda Islands were the only place in the world where nutmeg grew. The only place. And the indigenous Bandanese people had been trading their spice freely with Arab merchants, Chinese traders, and English sailors for centuries. The Dutch wanted exclusivity. The Bandanese refused. What happened next was one of the darkest chapters in corporate history. The total population of the Banda Islands was estimated at 15,000 people before the Dutch conquest. It is estimated that around 14,000 were killed, enslaved, or fled elsewhere, with only 1,000 Bandanese surviving on the islands. An entire civilization wiped out for nutmeg. The survivors were kept as forced laborers on Dutch plantations, growing the very spice their ancestors had cultivated freely for generations. The cultivation of nutmeg in the Banda Islands would then require the importation of slave labor from Java. And the Dutch? The Dutch East India Company now had a monopoly over nutmeg and mace production. And until around 1760, the annual profit for the company was 6 million guilders. 6 million guilders. Every single year for 100 years. By the middle of the 17th century, the VOC was something the world had never seen before. By the mid-1600s, the VOC boasted some 150 merchant ships and 50,000 employees, a private army of 10,000 soldiers and trading posts from the Persian Gulf to Japan. 50,000 employees. In the 1600s, before telephones, before telegraphs, before any form of instant communication across oceans, they were coordinating a global empire with ink and paper and sailing ships. Between 1602 and 1796, the VOC sent nearly 1 million Europeans to work in the Asia trade on 4,185 ships and netted more than 2.5 million tons of Asian trade goods. By contrast, the rest of Europe combined sent 882,412 people from 1500 to 1795. The rest of all of Europe couldn't keep up with one Dutch company. For a time in the 17th century, the VOC was able to sell spices across European kingdoms at 14 to 17 times the price it paid in Indonesia. 14 to 17 times on every shipment, across every market. This was the greatest margin machine in the history of human commerce. But here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. The VOC didn't just build a spice empire. It invented the entire system that runs the global economy today. Think about it. Shares in the VOC could be purchased by any citizen of the Dutch Republic and bought and sold on open-air secondary markets, one of which became the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's first stock exchange. Born in 1602, born to fund spice ships. On March 20th, 1602, the Dutch East India Company announced the first initial public offering, an IPO in history, laying the foundation for modern financial markets. And it wasn't just for the wealthy. One of the early investors was Neeltgen Cornelis, who worked as a maid for one of the owners of the VOC. She invested 100 guilders, a hard-earned sum when her wage amounted to just 50 cents a day. A maid buying stock. In 1602, the VOC didn't just open a trade route to Asia. It opened investing to ordinary people for the first time in human history. It was the first company to go public, and in doing so, founded the first stock exchange. It also pioneered the concept of the limited liability company, the foundational structure of every corporation operating in the world today. Every corporation you've ever heard of, Apple, Amazon, Tesla, Google, they all operate on legal frameworks that trace directly back to this one spice company from 17th century Amsterdam. That's not an exaggeration, that's history. Now, here's the number everyone argues about. And I want to be straight with you. The peak market capitalization of the VOC is widely reported as being equivalent to trillions of dollars in today's money. You'll see figures like 7.9 trillion or 8.2 trillion cited everywhere. But historians and economists have pushed back hard on those conversions. This discrepancy arises from a fundamental misunderstanding of inflation and economic growth. The 17th century world was vastly poorer than ours, with a global GDP perhaps 1/970th of what it is today. What is indisputable? At its peak, the VOC was worth more than Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and several other top firms combined, according to the most widely cited modern estimates. Whether you believe the exact number or not, the scale of dominance was real. No company before or since has controlled this much of the global economy relative to the world around it. By any measure, this was the most powerful commercial entity in the history of civilization, and it was built on a spice rack. So what brought it down? Ironically, the very thing that made it invincible: the monopoly. The monopoly required permanent military expenditure to maintain. As the cost of keeping the monopoly eventually overtook the revenue it generated, the financial model began to collapse. Then came corruption. VOC employees, poorly compensated for the extreme risks of overseas service, supplemented their incomes through private trade, the very thing they were forbidden to do. Then European tastes changed: coffee, tea, sugar. The spice obsession faded. And then came a war with Britain that destroyed the Dutch fleet and severed their Asian trade routes. The Dutch East India Company existed for nearly 200 years, from 1602 until its dissolution by the Dutch government on December 31, 1799. Nearly 2 centuries. 200 years of dominating the world's oceans, economies, and markets. And in the end, it collapsed not from a rival empire, but from the weight of its own ambition. Here's what I want you to sit with. The VOC went bankrupt, maintaining a monopoly over nutmeg, a spice you currently own for $4.99 at the supermarket. Entire civilizations were erased for it. Entire financial systems were invented to fund the ships that carried it. The stock market, the thing that shapes your retirement savings, your economy, your entire financial world, was born because Dutch merchants needed cash to go get it. Empires rise and fall, technologies come and go. But the structures this company built to chase a spice, those structures are still standing. They run the world. The most powerful company in history was built on something worth more than gold. And today, you use it to season eggnog. That's the wildest twist in business history. If this blew your mind, follow Empire and Greed for more stories about the empires, obsessions, and absolute madness that secretly built the modern world.